to a couple minutes late there. This is the Daily Dose COVID Conversations with CAIR. This is a daily news program that we have, webinar, community engaged program that we have for you, designed basically to bring the day's news as well as kind of pertinent conversations and important information to share with you during this COVID crisis. Our goal since the pandemic started was to create a space daily that we would be able to touch base with the community and also give information, critical information to you on various subjects that might be relevant for your life, both as just in your sort of life as a Muslim citizen, as well as just as an average citizen here working and trying to struggle with everybody else here. I'm very excited to announce that today we are being, we have on stage the way that we normally do, a guest from our CAIR chapters, Amina Barhoumi. Is that correct?
Amina.
Amina. I asked you. I actually asked her before how to say it. So Amina, thank you for joining us. So you are from, tell us, you're coming in from CAIR,
yes,
Ohio?
From CAIR, Ohio. I am recently joined back in February, right before the pandemic ensued. So I'm a new CAIR family member, I suppose. That's what we're referred to as, right? I'm the outreach director. Had lots of plans going in to do programming, and subhanAllah now have had to shift gears as other chapters have had to. So we still do programming online, and it's really exciting to be here with you.
Well, it's exciting to know that you've just joined us. Welcome, of course, to the CAIR team and everything like that. Where are you based in Ohio?
I'm currently in Columbus. So CAIR in Ohio, we recently merged actually with the Cincinnati chapter. So we cover Columbus, Dayton, Springfield, Cincinnati. We go up to Toledo too as well.
I see. We also have a Cleveland chapter, don't we? Do we have a Cleveland chapter?
We do have a Cleveland chapter, yes. And we coordinate a lot of the programming that we do that's annual, because, Ohioans deserve that. Muslim Ohioans particularly deserve that. So alhamdulillah, we're really excited about what this year is, although it's a very solemn time, given in light of the pandemic, we're still really ambitious in terms of all the work that we need to do. We are actually the third largest chapter in the country now, after, I believe, California and Florida.
No way, really?
Oh yeah. So that's
bigger than Texas. You're bigger than Texas?
I believe so. Yes, that's my understanding.
Well, so I hope the Texas chapters aren't listening, because they might get sensitive.
It's a very exciting time to be on the team, and again, we have lots of exciting programming, events, work that always needs to be done regardless of the circumstance, and frankly, even more so given the crisis that we're in.
Tell me, what kind of plans and projects did you have in terms of outreach? I know that some of our chapters do different types of things. Outreach might look different in Massachusetts than it does in Arizona. So what kind of things were you planning on doing?
Right, that's a really good question. Outreach is a very vague term. And so I'd say it's multifaceted, one of which obviously is engaging local government. That's really critical and important. So there's a government aspect to it. Some of it is interfaith work, making sure that we're in constant communication with our allies, trying to be able to see where Muslims can participate in justice work on a broader level. Some of it was also going to be youth work and beginning youth programming at our chapter. We're also moving in to a larger building in a couple of months. And so with this additional space, the idea was to be able to roll out, summer internships and youth programming to make sure that they're engaged, because essentially it's really critical for the sustainability of any chapter and just the broader idea of making sure that we develop leadership in the American Muslim community.
And it's really important, that you even provide some of those spaces, because frankly, large swaths of our community, coming from different backgrounds as they do, whether the immigrants or first generation, a large swath of our community doesn't really understand the idea of volunteering or civic engagement altogether. And so not only do we have this added pressure of the political moment that we're in, but the fact is that we have kind of, like a late start to the race. You know what I mean? Like we're really behind in terms of the race. And, we're a young community here. And we're, although some families have been here for generations, institutionally, we're still really young and light. And so I'm glad to see that they've got a forward-facing person, somebody eager to get out there and kind of bring some energy into the space.
Yeah.
So thank you. Thank you for joining the team. I look
Of
forward to
course.
working with you.
Of course. And that's, the youth aspect's definitely my passion. And what's almost commonly done is that we kind of isolate the Islamic component as a Muslim community to the so the religious aspect of our identity to basically the service aspect, when in fact they're very much intertwined. And that's really critical, especially for American Muslims, is that dual identity, or whatever hyphen we use, is so critical. And so it's really important that we engage them at that level. So I appreciate the question. And the last component or facet of outreach was or is to be able to ensure that there's safe spaces around in our schools. So when talking about youth, and then in every single aspect or facet, whether they be whether that if for Muslims, if they're a patient, for employees with their employers. And so a huge component of that is making sure that we educate different aspects of the broader community.
That's great. By the way, the national office, we've been working with chapters and others to optimize our school engagement practices. And so I'd be happy to share with you some of the work that we've done. If you go to our website, islamophobia.org, you'll see a section there called bias and bullying, and it'll show some of the work that we've done there. And we're just finishing up a pilot survey right now. And so if you'd like to survey students in Ohio around their experiences in public schools, including bullying, but also issues of bias and discrimination more generally, I'd be happy to work with you on that. We're really trying to build out our national capacity there. So looking forward to engaging with you a little bit there. I do want to break for just a second and address the audience for a second and say that today's show, we're expecting Ostada Aisha Prime to join us, who's a scholar in residence at the Islamic Center of New York University. But it looks like there might be some technical issues, and we are trying to resolve those now. And so in the meantime, inshallah, what we'd like to do is carry the conversation forward, learn about each other's work some more, and maybe share with you some more components of this work. And so one thing that we have been doing that a lot of people who are joining us for the first time may not realize is that we've been hosting this show for almost a month now. I'd say at least a full month now we've hosted this show, and we've tried to cover topics with guests ranging from your spiritual needs to your financial needs and everything in between: education, mental health, issues around family security, domestic violence, a number of issues. And through the course of these conversations, we've really managed to have some really exciting conversations and some really powerful conversations. And we want to make sure that we bring those back to our viewers. And so I believe the producers may have a clip available for us to watch from a previous show with Sheikha Tamara Gray, and Tamara Gray. Do we have that clip available? I'd like to play it, and then maybe we could chat about it. Okay, great. Here we go. And this is from a previous show. Okay, we had a little sound glitch there, but no big deal. To be expected. Third time's a charm. No problem. We got this. Yeah, we had this wonderful conversation with Tamara Gray a couple of weeks ago. So we want to make sure that we
in mind, which is that we have developed a habit of Ramadan that is not necessarily the traditional habit of Ramadan. By traditional, I don't mean our tradition, I mean an older tradition. Traditionally, especially scholars and especially the awliya and the ulama, if you will, when Ramadan came, they would close their doors. That was the time when they would sit down and worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And fill up their spiritual gas tanks for the rest of the year of intense giving and working that they would do all year long. So I think the first thing to do is to question our assumption, to say, is the Ramadan that we are used to, which is a very heavily social Ramadan, is that really the traditional Ramadan, or is it really the best Ramadan for our spiritual growth? So when we question our assumption, we open our heart to the possibility that this particular Ramadan might be, in its uniqueness, a unique growth spurt for us as a community.
That was great. What did you think about that?
Yeah, Ustadha Tamara Gray is, mashallah, I first met her back in Syria. So,
Okay.
yeah, so a lot of what she says definitely resonates with me. And it was very nice to actually see that live on your show. I actually watched it on the Daily
Okay,
Dose.
great.
That was, I was supposed to be working, but I took a break.
I
I'm following
benefited
up.
so much from that one. I was glued to that one. I was
Yeah,
glued
yeah,
to
that was really powerful. Lots of gems that were dropped. And part of what I appreciate and what resonates with me with Sheikha, Dr. Tamara Gray, is this concept of female scholarship that is really critical, and really this revival of it. And I know that Sheikha Aisha Prime was supposed to join us, and she as well is someone who's also trying to revive this idea here in the United States, which is so critical and so important. And it's not just a revival, I think, of female scholarship. It's this idea of revival of Islamic tradition, so to speak, that's been forgotten. So it's definitely derived back from, going to the Sunnah. But in terms of what, as Tamara mentioned, about us closing our doors, yeah, and it's such a hard thing to do, right? We all feel like we're missing out on something so critical and important, especially if community, masajid, family visiting, just this idea of togetherness was a huge component of Ramadan in itself. It's really a challenge to be able to grapple with, and it was really sort of reassuring to hear from her, to kind of change that framing and mindset to say, is that what Ramadan should be about, right? And so it's definitely eye-opening to be able to hear.
Yeah, it was really nice. I mean, I have to say that the forced sheltering, especially now during Ramadan, has been extremely beneficial for my soul and my spirit this month. Somehow, when you realize, and we should always realize this, that we're not in control, and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is actually the one in control. But now that literally everything else has stopped and you couldn't do anything if you wanted to, you're forced into a kind of, like a metaphorical itikaf, all the time, even before Ramadan. So that was really important. I did want to bring up something about your earlier comments on what Ustadha means for the Islamic tradition in terms of scholarship and women's involvement and in leadership there. It is incumbent upon people to realize that this is not something new, that there's not something that this is not some kind of modern or Western thing, that women are learning and leading in our tradition. If you go back and you look at the hadith, and you look at the hadith tradition and the qiraat tradition, we have women in every single generation. And they're not simply like Sheikh so-and-so's daughter or Sheikh so-and-so's sister. Sometimes that happens, right? But if you actually look at the text and you look at the books, mashallah, we have this amazing tradition that goes back, and not just scholarship, but institutions of education. A lot of people don't realize that Qarawayne University itself was established by a waqf, who the benefactor was a sister. And I believe it might have been the same for Al-Azhar. Do you know about that? I don't know why that's in my head. It's in my head for some reason, but
Fatima al-Fihri is definitely,
yeah.
Yes,
So,
a pioneer, I suppose, not just of her time, but her empowerment definitely came from her faith and our faith tradition that unfortunately has been lost in our spaces and our institutions, and has been forgotten. But there are individuals who are driving this revival of it, and that's really beautiful to be able to see. Because our tradition is actually filled with women within their own right that, not just were people of faith, but were teachers, and led and drove revivals and knowledge within their own right,
Yeah,
not in relation to anyone or anything else.
you have to realize that they owned, I should say they didn't own, but they directed Al-Kaf. Al-Kaf are the charitable institutions that drive our civil society. And many, many women were driving and in control of these assets and what would be the equivalent of like philanthropic entities today, like community foundations or something of the nature. So much of our, not just the substance of our scholarship goes back and is indebted to women's leadership, but also the very institutions, the very buildings, the salaries, the food, right? The misbah, you know what I mean? Like these kind of things, they go back. And so I'm very excited to see that come together. But on the subject of school, since you mentioned it earlier,
Right.
and thank you audience members for, hanging in there and listening with us. I think what we'll do is we'll continue to talk for a while, and hopefully we can figure out what happened with today's show, and we'll bring in Ostada Aisha Prime next week, inshallah. And Amina, if you're available, we'd like to have you back, of course, to lead that conversation. But on the subject of school and outreach and school engagement, I just wanted to ask you, kind of pick your brain a little bit. What's the conversation like in the Muslim community out in Ohio and the different places that you've seen for Muslim experiences in schools? Are kids getting bullied? Are teachers being respectful? Is it easy to get off for Eid? Do you run into like terrorist language in textbooks and school class discussions? Like, what kind of things are you hearing out there?
Yeah, thank you for this really important question and conversation. As I mentioned in the beginning, a large part of my work over, the last almost decade or a little bit more than that has been in youth work. And so these conversations are oftentimes very frank with young individuals. In asking, when you have this safe space and you ask young individuals these questions, only then do they share some of the more challenging conversations that they've had. Interestingly enough, and this is, obviously not very scientific, but at least in my experience, when I ask these questions or prompt these questions, the responses actually are really eye-opening. That oftentimes, much of the discourse that's very challenging for the students is less so from peers, but more so from teachers. And teachers, at the very worst of it, will utilize very derogatory comments. And students will often feel very unsafe or shameful or uncomfortable with reporting it because they don't want to be singled out. But even at best, the prejudices and assumptions, really trickle down even in how a classroom and the subject matter is facilitated. So in terms of framing, right? So, we've had students, for instance, with the experience of a teacher alluding to the culture of, in Hindu culture, for instance, of arranged marriage, and alluding to a student, oh, isn't that what you do? And just stopping at that. So, I mean, these are day in, day out, really regular, unfortunately, remarks that our Muslim students have to face very often on their own. Without the proper tools, and nor should they. I mean, even if they did have the proper tools and they had the ability to speak up, this is not something that, this is not an environment that's conducive to a classroom. And unfortunately, a lot of the times it's not ill-intentioned by teachers. It's just because they don't have, correct knowledge. They're not educated in terms of how to be able to speak about topics that are very loaded. We've had issues, for instance, just during the fall in terms of discussions surrounding 9/11, a particular video that was showed as part of like an educational sort of piece to be able to show students that made students feel uncomfortable. We were lucky enough that they spoke to their parents, and then the parents then engaged with the school to be able to make sure that this was and the school and the teachers were able to see from the lens of the Muslim students, which they had not even was not even on their radar, right? So it was just a blind spot that they had. And so this kind of work is really critical because we want to make sure that, you know, the youngest and most vulnerable of our Muslim communities are in a space where they, you know, could receive this education, which is fully within their right.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it is it's very unfortunate that that these kind of things are happening. I think some practitioners might call those microaggressions,
Right.
and people might not actually recognize that they're engaging in them. And you know what's ironic is sometimes it's really well-meaning teachers
Correct.
who will call out a student for their experience or their perspective, right? So imagine a scenario where like you're going over what happened on 9/11, okay? And the conversation is literally about terrorism and death.
Right.
And there is one student there in the whole classroom that's Muslim, and and the teacher wants to be courteous and say, "What's your perspective?"
Right.
Well, why in the world should I have a perspective on this? And like, this is the one time you're going to call on me and ask me to share like my innermost vulnerable kinds of issues. That in itself, even in the good faith effort, even in the kind of good intention of the teacher to try to make a healthy space, can be quite damaging for students and is not appropriate, right? I mean, could you just imagine, like, imagine the situation like we're going over we go over the Civil War, right? And you turn to a white student and say, "What's it? You know, what's it like
Right.
being white? You know, and going over the Civil War, and you know, oh, aren't you from Georgia? Aren't your parents, you know, didn't wasn't your grandfather and in from Georgia or something like this? Could you tell us about the KKK? Could you imagine what would happen? It would be a disaster. It would
Right.
be an absolute disaster. So, alhamdulillah, I'm glad that you're hearing about those things. What we've done is we've developed a survey instrument to measure these kind of responses. And by the way, if you want to implement it, we have it digitized now for the COVID,
That's
situation.
great.
And so if there is a way to engage youth during this time, we're happy to work with you and do that. And we kind of have the entire package ready to go. So let me know and I'll put you in touch with the
Sure.
staffer who does that.
Absolutely.
But on top of that, what we found very helpful is to hold focus groups with students, like you're saying, create those safe spaces, and then also hold kind of conversations and focus groups with school administrators, with parents, with teachers, to talk about best approaches to this work instead of just jumping in and saying, we need to come and do, you know, sorry, I'm getting a phone call, that we need to like come in and we have to do a training or we want to discuss Islamophobia. Sometimes that might not be the best first entree. So you really do have to build the relationship over time. And so is there any precedent for that out there? Or have you seen schools receptive to this conversation? Or are they closed off? What's your, and I know that you just started with CAIR, but I get the sense that you have some experience before that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it really, the short answer is it depends. I think, it depends if there's a large Muslim population in the school feels more obliged or inclined to be able to have these conversations. Very often these schools or school districts will have diversity coordinators that could lead these efforts. And there are schools that are not even on that radar where there isn't a sense where they see these conversations as important because Muslims or other minorities are very much a minority within the school. I would also say that a huge part of this is also on the responsibility of us as parents and of engaging the Muslim parents within these school districts. And so I know is not part of an effort, but privy to basically an effort that's been done through a local school district here in Columbus, where that has made real good headway in the terms of making sure that first and foremost, we're having representatives, parents be engaged within the school on the most sometimes mundane volunteer level, but their visibility is so critical. And then when they're able or when they do give back, schools then feel a sense of responsibility to make sure that they listen to them. So they have that basically leverage or that capital, whatever you want to call it. So that way, when there is a request or there is an issue that relationship has already been built. And so that's very much a grassroots effort, sort of, that's unfolding, I know, in one of our local school districts here in Ohio, and that's fared well. And that would be something that would be really nice to be able to pilot. And so additionally with that is the schools give an allowance. They have like an in-service day where there's different topics that the teachers will listen to. So there have been sessions about cultural competency specific to Muslim students. Something that's really great that went alongside that is like a portal of Ramadan resources that were shared.
Oh, that's great.
And that were shared with all basically the principals of the school, which then shared it with all the teachers, which then had a much more fuller understanding of what their students are going through, right? Because so it's just being a little bit more proactive and engaged in building these relationships, and these things take a lot of time.
That's wonderful. If you wouldn't mind, send that forward, because we're developing a toolkit.
Oh.
So that we could roll out at the end of July, early August, inshallah, when school gets back in a session, inshallah. And the toolkit will have primary materials that people can actually use and that we can conduct workshops with. And so,
Right.
Oftentimes we find a really great example of something like this done in a local context that had a lot of shareholders involved and it was a success. And so not only is that guide in and of itself a resource, but literally the story that led to that resource being shared is a resource for us to learn from, because some people might be lost and confused. So we can learn from these, treat them as case studies. So please do forward that. And Amina, this has been a very serendipitous type of meeting with you. I'm happy and I'm looking forward to it, if you're open to it, to talking further about how we can collaborate in any way that we can support work, especially on the research side, to gauge student responses. Inshallah, within a few more months, we should have something like of a national mosaic of understanding what these experiences look like for students. So before we close off, do you have any questions or any ideas or anything you'd like to ask me or share with the audience?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment in terms of this project that's very much data driven. I very much appreciate these focus groups that are happening. We very often, as a Muslim community, because we're learning and not as institutionalized in terms of our processes, but I appreciate the fact that these focus groups are happening, and that's a critical component, inshallah, to be able to kind of achieve what we want to achieve in terms of providing benefit both for students and parents and school districts, because these safe school environments are so critical. I wanted to also give a shout out. Again, this is not my work that I just shared. This is work that's being done at the Noor Islamic Cultural Center in Columbus through the outreach, the school outreach, basically initiative that started with a group of parents that were very eager to be able to have a day off for Muslim students during Eid, and realized in deliberation that we can't start with that. There needs to be a more concerted effort. And so they've done a lot of great work, and I'll definitely have the members of the group get in touch with you and share what they have as of now, inshallah.
Oh, that sounds wonderful. Thank you so much. And Jazakallah khair for your time, your energy, both today and every day, and joining us, and welcome to the CAIR scene. So, we'll be back in touch, because inshallah next week we'll try to do this again if you're available. So thank you again very much, Sister Amina. I'm going to say goodbye to the audience members now. And I just wanted to tell everybody that, like always, if you have any ideas or any topics that you'd like us to discuss, and there are issues that you feel like we should address, or there's information that you need, please feel free to reach out to us either on email or on Facebook or on YouTube, in the comment sections, anywhere. Please let us know your thoughts and your ideas and suggestions for speakers, and we'll try to bring them together. We've had many, many successful shows that were actually the product of sort of audience engagement and audience suggestion. So reminder, daily dose, COVID Conversations with CAIR, 3 p.m. daily now during Ramadan. We wish you all a blessed month of Ramadan. We hope that you and your families are safe and well wherever that you are. And so we ask you to join us again, inshallah, next week. And for now, we'll say Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.